language would you tell me? Because
In other words, in other words,
C,
we have to redo that.
CWSA, page 31.
31 or 32?
okay,
31. 31. Correct.
in other
Yes.
words, in other words, that's right. I've got it.
Yes.
So shall we start reading?
Yeah. We have already read it. You have to go through it.
Right. So I'll read each sentence and tell me whether it's clear. In other words, the Gita is not a book of practical ethics, but of spiritual life. So this is a very important thing. The difference between morality and spirituality. This is a morality is a product of the human mind, which is imperfect. And a spiritual life, it is not the mind that gives the principles, but the divine soul, the self. The values change entirely because the mind is at a lower level, it's at level 1, whereas the spirituality starts at level 2, and the absolute spirituality starts at level 3, the supermind. So this you go on saying, an idea came into my mind that I will make a chart, okay, and then I'll scan it and send it to everybody. It will help, okay. So anyway, we keep repeating about the level 1, level 2, level 3. So as soon as I find time, I'll do that, scan it and send it to everybody. So level 1, body, life and mind. And so the mind is in the primary levels of ignorance. So naturally, but even then, because it is superior to the vital, it does try to make some moral rules. Don't do this, don't do that, you can't tell lies, you can't tell people, you can uh, be in harmony with others. Very, very simple things. But remember that don't tell lies is valid at when you are in ignorance. But when you are in spiritual consciousness, even telling lies may be justified sometimes. Even murdering people, I shouldn't use the word murdering, but killing and eliminating your enemy may be very, very valid. Okay. So that is spiritual. But the mind is not deciding. That's the whole point. You must make a very clear difference between the two. It is the spiritual consciousness that decides what you have to do and what you have not to do. That's what Sri is stressing here very, very clearly. In other words, Gita is not a book of morals. Practical ethics means morality. The 10 commandments of Moses, okay, but of spiritual life. Okay. The next sentence. The modern mind is just now the European mind. It is they who tell you what to do and what not to do. Charity, philanthropy, helping others, all this is fine. It's extremely good, very high, but at a level 1, not at level 2. Okay. So the modern mind just now is the European mind, just as it has become after having abandoned not only the philosophical idealism of the highest Greco-Roman culture from which it started, but the Christian devotionalism of the Middle Ages. So in Europe also you had the base of European culture is all, as you said, Greece and Rome. Okay, they had developed tremendously. In fact, Greece at one time, 600 BC or even earlier, I don't know, I can't remember the exact dates, but it had a tremendous civilization in every field, in politics, in morality, in spirituality, okay, in every way, they were highly developed. But completely lost now. There is no trace except some buildings, Parthenon and other things. Okay, Apollo's temple and whatnot, but nothing. The civilization has completely vanished. And Will Durant, that great philosopher, historian, he says about Greece, I think we have told you that already once, that entire modern European history is nothing but a footnote to Greek civilization. So you can imagine, with all the glory of the Western civilization today, with all its material success, it is nothing, he says, compared to Greek civilization. And remember, Sremda was in Greece at one time. Okay, he says that in a letter. So, okay, so This is what he is saying, that the modern mind is just now a European mind. Just as it has become, after having abandoned not only the philosophic idealism of the highest Greco-Roman culture from which it started, but the Christian devotionalism of the Middle Ages. The Christian devotionalism was very good, there is no doubt about it. It moralized Europe, but it was at a mental level. Okay? These it has replaced. What is it? Gita. The Gita has replaced these by or transmuted into a practical idealism and social, patriotic and philanthropic devotion. So morality, Gita has translated into, it is not rejecting, remember that, it is not rejecting. In fact, in the last sentence, last paragraph, the last chapter, Sri Aurobindo says that the Gita is applicable at every level. It is applicable to the materialist, it is applicable to the moralist, it is applicable to the yogi, and it is also applicable at the highest level. The truths there in the Gita are applicable everywhere. That's why he's using the word practical. Okay? So then he says, and these it is replaced by or transmuted into practical idealism and social, patriotic and philanthropic devotion. It has got rid of God. What has got rid of God? Sorry, I made a
Modern
mistake.
mind. The modern mind has replaced it.
Yes, that's right. I made a mistake. It is these it has replaced. The modern mind, not Gita. I made a mistake. Sorry. These it has replaced by or transmuted to practical idealism and social, patriotic and philanthropic devotion. What I said is true, that Gita is applicable at all the levels, but that's not what he's meaning here. I made a mistake. These it has replaced. It is the modern mind, correct. It has replaced by or transmuted into practical idealism and social, patriotic and philanthropic devotion. It has got rid of God. That's what Europe has done. Materialistic philosophy. And kept him only for Sunday use. So don't let, in fact, that's a birth of secularism. Because what is applicable in Europe is not applicable in India. In India, there was no dichotomy, there was no difference, there was no essential gulf between spiritual life and the worldly life. There was nothing. But in Europe, the church was interfering in scientific matters, and that's why they said, enough is enough. We have to now get rid of the interference of religion in scientific matters. So we won't let them interfere. That was the birth of secularism, which is absolutely being misinterpreted in India today. In India, secularism means Modi can't go to a temple. This is the interpretation they give you. The most ridiculous thing. Of course, you can go. Secularism means in government matters, religion should not interfere. So, suppose you are distributing jobs, whether you are a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu or a Sikh, it does not matter at all. It should not come in. That is the thing. But that does not mean to say that you can't go to a temple. You can't recite prayers. In schools, for instance, the Muslims say we will not recite Vande Mataram because there is reference to Mother Durga. So we don't subscribe to that. That is absolutely nonsense. You are reducing secularism, which is essentially good, but you are misapplying the truth. So we come back to our text. This was a slight aside. It has got rid of God, European modern mind, and kept him only for Sunday use. Look at the irony, same those use of language. Sunday use. You can go to church on Sunday, but no interference on weekdays. And erected in his place man as its deity and society as its visible ideal. So the idea of philanthropy, charity, don't go into vague, this is the European idea, don't go into vague ideas of God, thought, which you don't even see and don't even experience. Be kind to man, help him, engage in charity, philanthropy, altruism, that is fine. Okay? That's a European idea. So society is an idea. At its best, European thought, it is practical, ethical, social, pragmatic, altruistic, and humanitarian. Okay. So, in fact, the humanitarianism in Europe has manifested itself in many ways. In France, for instance, there is something called Médecins Sans Frontières. I don't know if it exists today, but at one time it was there. The doctors were sent all over the world, wherever there were epidemics and all that, free for service. So Médecins Sans. Then from America also, there was an organization called Peace Corps. Okay. CORPS, Peace Corps. So they used to come and help where there is famine, where there is. So these things were all there, and these are all moral. That's what they're describing here. Practical, ethical, social, pragmatic, altruistic. You are being kind to your fellow men and humanitarian. Now, all these things are good. Simply saying is good, but at level 1 are especially needed in the present day, are part of the divine will. It's not that the divine will is telling you not to do, but the divine will has to tell you, not your mind, are part of the divine will, or they would not have become so dominant in humanity. Even altruism and philanthropy have a place. Kindness too. Why only human beings? Even to animals, kindness is very, very recommended. In fact, Gita has a very bhuta daya, the kindness to even all creatures, living creatures. So that is very much included. It is not excluded. But that doesn't mean to say that it is the ultimate. Humanitarianism, altruism, and philanthropy have become so dominant in humanity. Nor is there any reason why the divine man, the man who lives in the Brahmic consciousness, in the God being, should not be all these things in his action. Even the spiritual man can engage in philanthropy and altruism, but the guidance will come not from the mind but from the divine. He will be, if they are the best idea of the age, the Yoga Dharma, and there is no yet higher ideal to be established, no great radical change to be effected. So if you are not going to a higher level, then morality and practical ethics is very, very valid. That's what Sridhar is saying. If there is, so note that. He will be, okay, he will be all these things. He will be the divine man will be the moral man, he is saying, if they are the best ideal of that particular age, the Yoga Dharma. Each Yuga has got its own Dharma. And there is no yet higher ideal to be established, no great radical change to be effected. But as soon as there is the evolution to the next level, then the morality becomes a lesser ideal. It remains an ideal, but it's a lesser ideal. For he is, as the teacher points out to his disciple, the best who has to set the standard for others. In fact, Arjuna is called upon to live according to the highest ideas of his age and the prevailing culture, but with knowledge, with understanding of that which lay behind, and not as ordinary men with a following of the merely outward law and rule. The outward law and rule is a moral rule. So, Shri Krishna is telling him not to give up his morality, but go above morality. Very clear. Huh? There is no rejection of morality and ethics, but you have to go beyond. And the values will change, and also it is not negated. Its values will change, and your guidance, the source of your guidance will change. It's not the mind anymore, it's the divine. For the individual, it will be the divine guidance. So, very clear statement. Now, the difference between morality and spirituality. Morality is guided by the mind, and the spiritual life is guided by the spirit, the psychic being or the self. We read the next one. But the point here. Anyone?
I will read.
Yeah, please.
But the point here is that the modern mind has exiled from its practical motive power the two essential things, God or the eternal, and spirituality or the God state, which are the master conceptions of the Gita. It lives in humanity only, and the Gita would have us live in God, though for the world in God, in its life, heart, and intellect only. And the Gita would have us live in the spirit, in the mutable being who is all creatures. And the Gita would have us live also in the immutable and the supreme, in the changing march of time. And the Gita would have us live in the eternal. Or if these higher things are now beginning to be vaguely envisaged, it is only to make them subservient to man and society. But God and spirituality exist in their own right and not as adjuncts. And in practice, the lower in us must learn to exist for the higher, in order that the higher also may in us consciously exist for the lower, to draw it nearer to its own altitudes.
The same way is developing the theme further and telling you the difference between the two. So there is no rejection of the lower, but there is an integration of the lower into the higher. No? It's very clear what he's saying. In fact, the sentences are so clear. Your morality is telling you live at the lower level. Spirituality is telling live at the higher level. Okay, this basic idea is going on repeating in so many ways. So quickly we'll read the sentences and it is very clear what he's saying. But the point here is that the modern mind has exiled from its practical motive power the two essential things, God and eternal, or the eternal and spirituality, or the God state, which are the master conceptions of the Gita. So, if you make a distinction between spirit and matter, and the materialist says, be kind and be nice and all that at the lower level, the Gita is saying, I don't reject that, but keep anchor your consciousness at the higher level and continue to act in the lower, but guided by not the lower values, but the higher values. Let the divine guide you. And if the divine tells you to do something which seems to be immoral to others, do it. Don't worry about that. That's the point. But the point here is that the modern mind has exiled. That means they have limited themselves only to the lower level. They have exiled the higher level, which is two essential things, God or the eternal, and spirituality or the God state, which are the master conceptions of the Gita. You have to live in the physical world, not reject it, but your consciousness should be anchored above. You should continue to live in the physical world and be guided by the above, not the lower. Now, one by one, in a dramatic style, he's telling you the difference between the two. It lives in humanity only. Okay? Man is the central theme of morality, the European modern mind. And the Gita would have us live in God, which is the higher level. Very, very clear. One is saying, don't bother about God, be kind to men. But the Gita is saying, be kind to men. I don't reject it, but your consciousness should be guided by God, not by the mind. Though in the world, though for the world in God, there you are. You don't give up the world, but you are guided in your actions in the world by God and not the mind. In its life, heart, and intellect only. This is what the modern Indian mind is saying. Live in the life, heart, and intellect only, and the Gita would have us live in the spirit. Okay. Anchor yourself to the above and don't reject the lower. In the mutable being who is all creatures. So this is repeating, he is not using the words, but he is repeating. The modern mind would have you live in the mutable being. You have to repeat those, this is his style. It lives, you have to go on repeating. The modern mind, it lives in the mutable being who is all creatures, humanity, all creatures, humanity. And the not only humanity, all living creatures. Yeah, it's more than humanity. And the Gita would have us live also in the immutable and the supreme. Note the word also. He is not telling you not to live in the physical world, but you must be live also in the immutable and the supreme, which the modern European mind is rejecting. Live only in the lower, but Gita is saying live in the lower, no doubt, but also anchor your consciousness to the higher and be guided from there. In the changing march of time, again you have to repeat, it lives in the changing march of time. And the Gita would have us live in the eternal. The changing march of time is time and space, mutability, okay? The world of time and space means transience. So the physical world, you live in the physical world is saying the modern mind, but the Gita is saying live in the eternal, continue to work in the non-eternal, continue to work in the transient. Or it's a grammatical thing, huh? You must be able to, you have to repeat the words lives. The modern mind lives in humanity. The modern mind lives in the life, heart and intellect. The modern mind in the mutable being, okay, in the changing march of time. In all these phrases, you have to repeat it lives. Modern mind. And Srimati is going on giving the Gita what is there recommended. Or if these higher things are now beginning to be vaguely envisaged, it is only to make them subservient to man and society. He's still talking about the modern European mind. But God and spirituality exist in their own right and not as adjuncts. Even if there are people who say, oh, God is there and we should, but man is the central being, God is there. Use God for the service of man. But it is not like that. God is not an adjunct. He is not something auxiliary. He is not something secondary in the physical world. He should be the primary one and the world should be the auxiliary world. It should be the second. Put God first and put the world second. But the modern mind is saying, put the world first and God also let it be there, but it can be behind the world. And in practice, the lower in us must learn to exist for the higher. The lower in us must learn to exist for the higher, in order that the higher also may in us consciously exist for the lower, to draw it nearer to its own altitudes. Very clear the difference between the two? The modern mind is insisting on the primacy of the lower world, whereas the Gita is saying lower world, okay, but the primacy should be in God. And
but the problem, Rangada, is that we are driven with by the mind, but
yes,
but the mind is never sure whether it's the call of from the within, or because it gives all the arguments for what it thinks. No.
what you're saying is absolutely correct. So what is the solution? Appeal to God for light and guidance. Then slowly it changes. What you're saying is absolutely right. We are all in ignorance. We have to start from ignorance. But there is something vague, 1%, 2%, in some people 10%, which says that there is something more than my body, mind, life. So appeal to that. And the answer will always come. As the Gita, in many places, you have in the Bible also, knock and the door should open. But you have to knock. But if you knock, the door will open. What you're saying is absolutely right. We are guided by the mind. So how do we do it? As I said, that one small capacity, that one small faculty is given to you. Use that faculty. We don't use it. Appeal to God. Ask for guidance. Prayer. Aspiration. That's the only way. So, very small para, but very sharply divided between God and the world. The Gita is not rejecting the world. The European mind is rejecting God and living only in the world. And even when it doesn't reject God, the primacy, the most important thing is philanthropy, altruism, etc. But the Gita says, no, both are valid, but you have to live more in God. Okay? If you can't appeal, go on aspiring. And all the yogas are there available for you, and you can use each yoga according to the bent of your nature. If you want to do Jnana Yoga, you do Jnana Yoga. If you want to do Integral Yoga, you do Integral. But it is not meant for all. As I told you, many people used to write to Sri Aurobindo in their 20s and 30s. Sir, we want to come and do your yoga. So Sri Aurobindo will say, what is your intention? What is the aim of your yoga? And if they would answer, we want peace, liberation. Then he says, not here. Go to other schools, go to Raman Maharshi, you'll get liberation and peace. But here, we have to go beyond liberation and peace. That's not the aim we have. We have to go beyond. That is why it is said in a way which is often misinterpreted as sense of superiority. The Sri Aurobindo yoga starts where the others end. But this is a statement of fact, not of arrogance or anything. Others are ending in liberation. Others are ending in peace and liberation. But now Sri Aurobindo says, having got liberation, the integral yoga now insists that you must come down to the physical world and work for God in the physical world. So the real work starts at that way. Okay? So we go on to the next para, which is about 1 page. Okay? So Tarika, you read just now, na?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so next. Anyone decide quick and read.
Shall I
You
read?
want me to read?
Yes, why not?
Therefore,
So
it is
Rangad,
a
I'll have to leave now. I'll go.
Yes. You
Yeah.
said that. No problem.
Thank
It's
you.
important for you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Therefore, it is a mistake to interpret the Gita from the standpoint of the mentality of today and force it to teach us the disinterested performance of duty as the highest and all sufficient law. A little consideration of the situation with which the Gita deals will show us that this could be its meaning. For the whole point of the teaching, that from which it arises, that which compels the disciple to seek the teacher, is an inextricable clash of the various related conceptions of duty, ending in the collapse of the whole useful intellectual and moral edifice erected by the human mind. In human life, some sort of a clash arises fairly often, as for instance between domestic duties and the call of the country or the cause, or between the claim of the country and the good of humanity, or some larger religious or moral principle. An inner situation may even arise, as with the Buddha, in which all duties have to be abandoned, trampled on, flung aside in order to follow the call of the divine within. I cannot think that the Gita would solve such an inner situation by sending Buddha back to his wife and father and the government of the Sakya state, or would direct a Ramakrishna to become a Pandit in a vernacular school and disinterestedly teach little boys their lessons, or bind down a Vivekananda to support his family, and for that to follow dispassionately the law of law or medicine or journalism. The Gita does not teach the disinterested performance of duties, but the following of the divine life, the abandonment of all dharmas, sarva dharman, to take refuge in the Supreme alone. In the divine activity of the Buddha, a Ramakrishna, a Vivekananda is perfectly in consonance with the teaching. Nay, although the Gita prefers action to inaction, it does not rule out the renunciation of works, but accepts it as one of the ways to the divine. If that can only be attained by renouncing works and life and all duties, and the call is strong within us, then into the bonfire they must go, and there is no help for it. The call of God is imperative and cannot be weighed against any other considerations.
This is a very interesting para, and the language of Sri Lanka is so different from other places. Na? So he's talking to the public. Okay? He's saying so many things he's saying. Talking of law, medicine, journalism, and he's giving so many examples. He has not given his own example. We'll discuss that, okay? But his own example was the same. What he's saying, in other words, is he's carrying on the what he has established in the higher level, in the higher paragraph. He's saying primacy of God is more important than primacy of the world. So, and in the world, there are many duties. For instance, it is your duty to look after your family, certainly. But suppose there is a higher call, okay, then which one should you do? Suppose the country says that the country is in danger and you have to enlist in the army. Should you do that, or should you say, no, I have to look after my family? Which is the higher value? The family is a limited and the country is the whole. It is much more. The country is your entire, the total family. So you have to do that. So that's what he's mentioning here. And he is giving so many interesting examples that Buddha gave up his wife and newborn child. He gave up and went away. Why? Because the higher call was there, valid. I'll give you some very interesting examples in the ashram also. Okay. Then what about Ramakrishna? Okay. He also, he could have said this, he could have been a teacher in a vernacular school. And note that interestingly, Swendra is very clearly saying vernacular school. Okay. So because where is it? Vernacular. Does he say vernacular? Yes, he says vernacular. Because he didn't know English, that's why. Even there, you see how accurate he is.
It is the fifth line on page 33.
Yes, I've got it, yeah. So, and then so he gave the example of Buddha, he gave the example of Ramakrishna, and he gave the example of Vivekananda, because Vivekananda also same thing happened. He was from a very well-to-do family, Vivekananda. But the father was tremendously generous, and anybody who used to come to him, he used to help him with financially and other ways. So by the time Vivekananda was almost finishing his college, the family was in great difficulty, and he wanted a job, but he was not getting a job. At that time only he came to know about Ramakrishna, and he went to him and he told him that if you think you have got connection with God, ask him to give me a job and tell me. So that's a very interesting story, but that's something altogether different. Okay, but I'll just mention it because it's very interesting. So Ramakrishna went and says, I can't ask for somebody else. I can never ask for some limited things. I can ask for great things, but I can't ask for limited things. So you go and ask. He's telling Vivekananda, why don't you go and ask? Why should I ask for you? You go and ask yourself. So Vivekananda very hesitatingly goes, stands in front of the idol, and what does he ask for? He starts asking for Gyan thou, Bhakti thou. Okay? This is what he asked for. Then he comes back. So it's his soul which comes back, not his mind. His mind is saying, I need a job. But when he goes and stands in front of the divine image, he says that give me knowledge, give me devotion. And he comes back. Then Ramakrishna asks him, did you ask? He says, no, I didn't. He says, go back again. So 3 times he goes and he is unable to ask for a job. Okay? So that shows the nobility of his soul. Okay? He is not able to ask for something limited. Okay? It reminds me of a very interesting story. There was a gentleman here in the ashram. Okay, it's a related story that I'm telling you. On his birthday, we used to always write what books I want from the mother. And she would give us the book. On one birthday, we want essay on the Gita, she would give you. But if you did not write anything, she herself would give you something. Either a small booklet or a diary. I remember once she gave me a diary and she told me Tu sais ce que c'est un agenda? I said, no, ma'am. Then she said, here it is. This is a diary. And she signed it and gave it to me. So if you asked for books, she would give it to you. If you didn't ask for books, she would give you something else on your birthday. Now this man, he wrote a chit to the mother on his birthday. I want oil, I want dhania powder, I want chili powder, I want jeera and haldi from the dining hall on my birthday. It's a real fact, huh? It really happened. And mother was so flabbergasted. She said, you could have asked for something more valuable than jeera and haldi. So, this is, Vivekananda could not do it. He could not ask for hira and haldi. He could not do that. So, then finally he said, you go and ask. So Ramakrishna asks, and the Divine Mother tells him, don't worry, even if he does not have a job, there will be just enough for dal bhat. He will never suffer. But that doesn't mean to say that he will get a job or anything. Okay. So that's exactly what Sri is mentioning here. Vivekananda. We don't even mention, he has not mentioned about himself, naturally, how can he? But he gave up his family life, he gave up ties even with his wife, and she used to constantly badger him. She used to go on saying, you are incapable of even supporting your own wife. Okay? But he would answer and say that you must understand that I have a higher call. Okay? And you, as my Sadharmini, you should actually follow me. Won't you do that? As a good Indian wife, he asks in one letter, a beautiful letter, and he says that I have a good call. The call of the country is there in me, and later on he says, the divine is guiding me in everything. So this para is a very interesting one, and that's what it is. So we'll go through each sentence, but this is the basic idea. When the higher call comes, the lower is not necessarily valid. I'll give you another very interesting example. There used to be a gentleman here called Madan Lal. Okay, he was from UP, a Hindi-speaking man, and that Madan Lal used to live in what is now children's dispensary. Okay, and he used to play tennis with us. But tennis he used to play with us, but he came here in the 30s, and he gave up his family and came here. Now the family was very angry that he had left his family and come away. And they came here to argue with Sri Aurobindo mother. And they said, he is neglecting his family. Please send him back. And they stayed here trying to convince Madanlal also to go back, and also telling Sri Aurobindo to give him permission to go back. They stayed here for 2-3 months in the ashram, going on trying to convince him. But what do you think Sri Aurobindo did? He supported Madan Lal. He said, as long as he wants to go to the higher life, you have no claim on him. But if he himself wants to go, that's another matter. But he does not want to go, there is no question of your insisting on his going back. His call is a higher one than the family. So this is exactly what Sri is saying in this paragraph. When the higher call comes, the lower, however important it be, can be sacrificed. That's what he's saying. Okay. Now we read each one. I gave you so many examples, and this is exactly what he's saying in the paragraph. Therefore, it's a mistake to interpret the Gita from the standpoint of the mentality of today, modern European mind. Even in India, when Sri Aurobindo wrote this, the modern Indian educated was absolutely westernized in his thinking. We had completely forgotten. Even today, our so-called intellectuals, I won't take names because we are recording, but there are so many intellectuals who have Western values. They understand nothing about Indian culture. And force it, the mentality of today, and force it. It was the Gita, force the Gita to teach us the disinterested performance of duty as the highest and the all-sufficient law. Do the duty you have in a disinterested manner. They are disinterested nishkama karma. Okay? Nishkama karma is fine, but it's not a duty at all. It depends on, because you have to understand very clearly what is the duty of a Kshatriya? To fight. and to protect the weak. But if the divine says that you have to go beyond this duty, you should be prepared to do it. So the Gita is not telling you to do your duty. In fact, Sridhar says very clearly, later on in the next paragraph, he says, duty is not something that is applicable to the spiritual man. There is no duty for him. It is only the divine guidance that becomes the work field. Okay? There is no duty for the spiritual man. He will do whatever he is asked to do. But duty means in humanity, whatever you are asked to do by society, you will do that. So this is what Sridhar is saying. It is not performance of duty. That's the highest. And Sridhar is explaining. A little consideration of the situation with which the Gita deals will show us that this could not be its meaning. By the way, you have to read the correct sentence. With which the Gita will show us that this could not be the meaning of its meaning. It is not duty that the Gita is recommending. It is go beyond duty. For the whole point of the teaching, that from which it arises, that which compels the disciple to seek the teacher, is an inextricable clash of the various related conceptions of duty, ending in the collapse of the whole useful intellectual and moral edifice erected by the human mind. So, intellectual and moral edifice is created by man. And what does he say? What does he tell Arjuna? It is your duty to protect the poor. You have to be a Kshatriya. You have to use that. You can't kill your own kind. You can't kill your own relatives. But this is exactly what Sridhar is saying. The Gita is doing exactly the opposite. It is telling him to go beyond morality and duty, human duty. Do the divine duty and not the human duty. In human life, some sort of a clash arises fairly often, as for instance, between domestic duties and the call of the country, or a cause, or between the claim of the country and the good of humanity. There are many, many videos now in modern times, and there is a gentleman, his name is Gaur Gopal. Okay, he gives very interesting talks, and he rebelled against his father, and he went into a spiritual life. He joined the Krishna consciousness movement, I think, something like that. And his father was absolutely against him. He said, no, you have to be in the physical world. What are you running after all these vague things? But he did not. So that's another interesting modern example. Now, and the good of humanity. So in human life, some sort of a clash arises fairly often, as for instance, between domestic duties and the call of the country. It is very common. It's not at all uncommon for those who have to give up their family and go for spiritual life. Or the cause, or between the claim of the country and the good of humanity, or some larger religious and moral principle. An inner situation may even arise, as with the Buddha, in which all duties have to be abandoned, trampled and flung aside in order to follow the call of the divine within. So Buddha was very clear. He is young man, and he gives up his wife and child and goes out. I cannot think that the Gita would solve such an inner situation by sending Buddha back to his wife and father and the government of the Sakya state. That was the kingdom in which he was born, the Sakya state. Or would direct a Ramakrishna to become a Pandit in a vernacular school. Vernacular is clear, na? Indian languages. And disinterestedly teach little boys their little. See, Sridhar's language is so interesting. He added the word little boys. Okay? He did not have said that. He could have just said children. But his language always is very, very subtle. Okay? So there is an amount of irony involved in this. Disinterestedly teach little boys their lessons. Or bind down a Vivekananda to support his family, and for that to follow dispassionately the law or medicine or journalism. You want a job? Do all these things, you'll get a job. The Gita does not teach the disinterested performance of duties, but the following of the divine life and abandonment of all dharmas. Duties are dharmas, sarva dharman parityajya. Okay? To take refuge in the Supreme alone and the divine activity of Buddha, Ramakrishna, and Vivekananda, and we may also add Sri Aurobindo, is perfectly in consonance with this teaching. Nay, although the Gita prefers action to inaction, okay, it does not rule out the renunciation of works. It does not rule out the renunciation of works. If it so finds it necessary, you can give up the world. That's what Sri Aurobindo was asked to do. Go to Chandranagar. Don't worry about the freedom movement. Go to Chandranagar. Don't worry about your family. From there, go to Pondicherry. Okay? He's not even questioning. He has been asked to go, he goes. And he says in one place, I could recognize the voice, the familiar voice, because he was being guided constantly in jail by Sri Krishna. So he could understand Sri Krishna's voice. Okay? He says that. So he went straight away, ignoring the world. Okay? That's the whole point. So, nay, although the Gita prefers action to inaction, it does not rule out the renunciation of works. It's necessary to do that, but accept it as one of the ways of the divine. There is no rejection of the lower values. There is an integration of the lower values into the higher. If that can only be attained by renouncing works and life and all duties, and the call is strong within us, then into the bonfire they must go. All your moral values can be burnt away, and there is no help for it. The call of God is imperative and cannot be weighed against any other considerations. Okay, we stop here. We have gone, according to the new timings, we have 2 minutes more, but we will stop here. Okay, very interesting 2 paragraphs. He is telling you what is the difference between moral life and spiritual life.